Hey, we are delighted you're with us. And maybe I can take a moment before we get into the Word this morning and just share with you a bit of my week, which Pastor's Week always has really cool privileges and some pretty heavy burdens. And this was just one of the weeks where the burdens seemed to kind of seek me out. A week ago on Friday morning, I did a funeral for a 36-year-old man. And I remember, even as I was there and the family was asking, does not this seem young to die, right? I did the funeral. I got in the van with my family. We drove to a wedding in Indiana. My wife's niece was getting married, and it was just a beautiful wedding, perfect couple, godly young man, tall, dark, and handsome, all the things you would have expected, right? And at the reception, the grandmother stepped up and began to share. She shared that there was someone missing from the wedding. It would have been the groom's father, who would have loved to have been there for that day, except the fact that he succumbed to cancer 20 years earlier. I remember just sitting there thinking, man, this was a really cool wedding. As a dad, I would love to have just watched my son become all the things that Wes was. Right? I came home to the phone call that Coach Al was slipping, and Friday morning, spent Friday morning there for a few moments because I was doing a men's retreat up in New York, spent Friday morning with Jean watching a wife say goodbye to a husband after all of those years. And somewhere in here I started thinking, Lord, I see this stuff on a fairly regular basis, but sometimes it's just so hard, like, to actually see you in circumstances that are so painful. Right? I went to the men's retreat. The pastors there told me that there was a gentleman who was coming whose wife had just died. And I had one of the most amazing conversations I've ever had. They said, Phil, it'd be great if you could talk to him at some point. I sit down at lunch. There's an empty place next to me. Somebody's food is there. I start talking to the guy to the right of me. All of a sudden, I realize that the guy to the left of me is the man whose wife had died. I asked him about that a little bit. He told me 2 months ago, my wife said, honey, I have a headache. I'm going to go upstairs and go to sleep. And she had a brain aneurysm. She passed away in our home. I'm left here with a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 6-year-old. And then he just started to pour out how his life with his wife had been so incredibly special. Right? We laughed about the joys of marriage. We cried about the challenges of where his life was. And I just remember thinking, Lord, like you are so limited in what you can even say when someone is engaging in that much difficulty and that much pain. Everything, and hear me in this, everything feels trite, right? Like I can't quote a quick Bible verse to that. 2 hours later, we're still talking, right? The whole dining room is emptied out, and I told Kim, part of me just wanted to get up, get in the car, drive home, and hug my wife, right? And just say, and I'm sorry for all the times I took you for granted. Like I'm thinking I have the rest of my life. But we don't know that, do we? We don't know that. What to do when I can't see God in my circumstances? I know you've already read the book of Habakkuk, but I just keep getting drawn back to this book. Because Habakkuk shows us what we're supposed to do when we don't really understand how God is working. And in fact, of all the books in the Old Testament, Habakkuk remains one of my favorite books because Habakkuk had a problem and he voiced it to God and God answered him, and then Habakkuk really had a problem and he voiced that to God. Right? And then God gave him some things to work on, and then Habakkuk suddenly comes to the end of the book and he finds a way to praise God in spite of the fact that his difficulty hasn't left. So take your Bibles and go there with me. And I know I started the message probably heavier than normal, but I hope you heard in it sincerity and transparency. I've pastored a long time, and you start to accumulate people's privileges, their joys, their blessings. You accumulate their pain. You see their children raised almost from the dead from accidents. You see some of them go to heaven. Yet in the midst of it, it's sometimes hard not to see the depth and difficulty, and even sometimes wonder, like, God, how are you revealing yourself in this? Here's Habakkuk, chapter 1, verse 1. The oracle of Habakkuk the prophet saw. Verse 2. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not hear? Or cry to you violence, and you will not save? Why do you have to make me see iniquity? And why do you idly look at wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. So the law is paralyzed, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, and so justice goes forth perverted. Here's the first thing you want to do when you can't find God in your circumstances. You want to make your complaints to the Lord, not about him. Okay? This is priceless. I mean, this is Habakkuk saying, Lord, where are you? Right? And you just want to picture this. Habakkuk is a prophet of Judah. It's the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom has already been dispersed, but the southern kingdom is there. Josiah was the king. During that era, it was great. Now there's a king coming that's not that great. And Habakkuk sees all of these problems in his country, and he says, Lord, will you not do something? Will you not do something? For just a moment, note this, if you will. You see the fact that he calls into question justice. There's a lot of things said in our country, this isn't that different, is it, about social injustice. Listen, before we're quick to just kind of wipe that off the table, we should ask better questions. Habakkuk did, right? He saw inconsistencies. He called out to God on those inconsistencies. Not only that, he saw destruction, and he said, listen, Lord, hold the people who are creating the destruction accountable. Right? God said, okay, I will. Look at verse 5. Look among the nations and see, wonder, and be astounded. This is God speaking. So far, Habakkuk says, that sounds pretty good. For I am doing a work in your days. Great, Lord, you're going to do something right now for me that you would not believe if told. Okay, I want to hear it. Bring justice. Behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, who march through the breadth of the earth to seize dwellings not their own. Okay, now, get this. If the nation of Judah needed a slap on the wrist, then the Chaldeans were so violent that they needed the execution. Okay, I just want you to picture this. This is God saying, I got a plan, Habakkuk. Here's my plan. I'm going to take the most wicked, violent nation, and I'm going to use them to discipline your people. And if you don't have a problem with that, you're not thinking like Habakkuk would be thinking. Like Habakkuk would say, man, I shouldn't have said anything to you, Lord, if you're going to do that. I just thought you were going to fix the problem, right? You are taking the most violent nation to discipline us? Like, how is that even possible? Now I got another problem with justice, Habakkuk would say. And God continues revealing that this pagan nation would come into Judah and they would take Judah out and discipline them, the very thing that Habakkuk said should happen to his nation, but not from within, from without. Wow. Here's the thing you want to know, is you want to come to this point where not only do you make your complaints to the Lord, not about him, but you want to make sure that you just don't keep complaining, but that you start listening. Because that's exactly what Habakkuk does in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 1. Watch this. I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint. Okay, Lord, now I really don't understand what you're doing. I thought I kind of understood, but now I don't understand at all. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my stand at a watchpost. I love that. That's the picture of the security of a city. He's going to watch intensely, waiting for God's answer. There is a readiness, an attentiveness here. When you and I voice a concern or a complaint to God, we can say to God, God, I do not see how you're operating here. I cannot see you in this circumstance. We can voice that complaint to him. But when we voice it, we also better say, and I am ready for you to answer. I am so ready. I'm like a watchman on a tower looking for your answer. And I love this. Look at this. Chapter 2, verse 1. And I will look out to see what you will say to me. I'm listening, Lord. I'm listening. And not only that, what I will answer concerning my complaint. I will not only watch with readiness, I will listen, but I will participate in the discussion. I won't say, well, God spoke and now it's not going to change anything anyhow. I will listen to what you want to say, and when you speak, I will be ready, and I will think through those thoughts with you, and I will participate in the discussion. When I can't understand where God is working in circumstances and they seem painful, I just find so much encouragement in the way Habakkuk figures it out. Here's the thing. The thing I've learned as a pastor is that whenever anybody suffers, they just have one question. Okay? And I'll just ask you, you want to guess what that question is? It's just one word. With me? What is it? Why? I've learned to start to say, I may never know why, and you may never know why. But that doesn't change the fact that we should still do something today as followers of Christ. We want the why. Habakkuk doesn't really get the why. This is really important. He gets something else instead. And when you see what he gets, you're going to understand what you're supposed to go get. Watch. Make your complaints to the Lord, not about him. Make sure that you just don't keep complaining, but that you start listening. Here's the third idea. Make the discovery of God's truth your primary concern, not just your answer. Okay? Make the discovery of God's truth your primary concern, not just your answer. Habakkuk is given in this oracle 3 statements that show up like in the New Testament. One statement that absolutely revolutionized church history. It revolutionized the history of the church. 2 other statements that we look forward to one day, and those statements are given right here. So look with me at chapter 2, verse 4. Behold, his soul is puffed up, speaking to the Babylonian king. It is not upright within him, but here it comes. But the righteous or the just shall live by faith. There's the first one. Look with me at chapter 2, verse 14. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge and the glory of the Lord. That's the second one. Here's the third one. Look with me at verse 20. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. 3 statements that are truths about God, not the answer to the why question, not the answer to the how could you do this question, but 3 truths about God that revolutionize, in my thinking, how Habakkuk gets to his final psalm, the very few verses of chapter 3. So let's just talk about those briefly. The just shall live by faith. God uses Habakkuk to pen something that would change the church forever. This year, in October 31st, actually, the church at large will celebrate the 500th year of the Reformation. It is this verse, it is this idea that Martin Luther tied his whole life to and said, this is what I believe. Not that we do all of these things or that we buy our way to heaven or that we work our way to heaven, but simply that we go to heaven by faith alone, right, in the finished work of Christ. To feel the weight of that for a second, let me take you back to Martin Luther's time. He's recorded and written his things that he sees the Bible saying. The church at the time, the Roman Catholic Church, invites him to defend those things. And he knows that if he defends them and doesn't recant on them, they're going to throw him out of the church and possibly, as they had others, execute him. So here's what he says. They bring him forward. They say, are these your writings? There they are on the table. I absolutely love this. Before he says, here I stand, I can do no other, he says this, can I think about it for a day? Okay. I love that. We tend to think of people who have taken their stand in church history as just bold people who weren't real people. This is a man who knows what's at stake, and he looks and he says, I got to think about it. I know I wrote it. I know I believe it. I just got to think about it. When you read church history, you'll find other characters in church history who do the same thing, right? There's men in church history who denied and then came back and said, I recount that I denied. I love the story of the one of the one church leader who recanted his faith and then came to the fire and said, now that I'm being burned, I need to tell you something. This hand is what I use to sign the statements that recanted my faith, so my hand will burn first. Right? Martin Luther says, on the next day, having considered what I've written, I cannot and I will not go against this. Here I stand, I can do no other. Because Martin Luther came to this verse, the just shall live by faith. What I believe about Jesus Christ matters, and I can't turn away from it. When I come to the table of a man who has lost his wife, and we are weeping and we are engaged together, I am sitting there thinking, if it is not for what we believe, there is no hope here. You and I come back to what we believe. The just shall live by faith. We believe that our faith in the finished work of Christ is what gives life meaning, is what gives life hope, is what offers salvation. It is the truth that God is speaking through Habakkuk. It isn't the answer to his question, but it is the truth that he needs to hear. Not only that, he goes on to make this great statement in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 14, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord. Just for a moment, take your Bibles and go with me to Isaiah chapter 6. Back to Isaiah. Keep a finger here in Habakkuk. I know he was hard to find, so you don't want to lose him, okay? Isaiah chapter 6. Go there with me. Isaiah 6. This is a passage you know. You've probably heard. Let me pick up the reading in verse 1. In the year that King Uzziah died, their suffering, Isaiah says, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. By the way, he said regarding that. When I read Revelation and I hear that there's multiple colors coming off the throne, I think of that picture, and you know what I think? Even that picture is weak. Take the most beautiful thing you've ever seen, multiply it by 1,000 times, and still you're not there to the glory of God filling the earth. That's a truth that's coming. Right? We live in this world now that is just like we see little windows of that, and then we got to drive through the rest of the stuff to ever see that again. And we drive through deserts, and we drive through all kinds of other places that don't have that degree of beauty. And we say, oh, for the day that everything will be like that. Not only will everything be like that, but it will fill the earth. Okay? You won't be able to find a place that isn't rainbow-like in color. You won't be able to find a place that doesn't show the beauty of the mountains. You won't be able to find a place, right? Because the whole earth will be filled with his glory. That's not the answer to why. That's why I say you want to think more carefully in this regard about not so much about the answer to your question, but about the discovery of truths about God that will help you in the answer to your question. We just want the answer. We just want the answer. And then I noticed that last one. The Lord is on his throne. That's how I captured that, right? Because Habakkuk said, listen, the Lord is in his holy temple. Isaiah said, listen, the Lord is on his throne in his holy temple. Here's the picture. When you and I wonder about all those why questions, the one thing we must understand is that God is still ruling from his throne. You may want some other answers, but God did not go to sleep on his throne. The psalmist said he never slumbers nor he sleeps. He is still there. He is still in charge. He is still controlling. He is still walking us through history. In fact, my eyes drawn back to this other verse in Habakkuk. Go back there with me for a second. Look at this. See how he says, Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 2, and the Lord answered me, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so he may run who reads it. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. You know something? Regarding these elements, the earth will be filled with the glory of God. God is still on his throne. God's timetable is different than yours and mine. Remember, yesterday when I talked to this husband who lost his wife, there was so much insight. It was like I couldn't hardly, and there was so much pain. I was just sitting there trying to absorb all of it. He says to me, Phil, you know how life goes really fast? Like we have these kids and they grow up so fast? I said, yeah. He said, my mom said, and she's lost a couple husbands already. My mom says to me, listen, don't worry. You're going to be with them in eternity. Don't worry about it right now. You'll have all of eternity together. And he said, I thought, it feels like eternity is so far away. Like the first 20 years went really fast, but now every day feels like the next day will never get there. Suffering does that to us, doesn't it? It seems like it takes forever to get there. I shared with him, listen, when I'm not a big pain guy, so I don't really do well with pain, but I said a few years ago when I had my appendix out, I understand, because there was we were in the Pikes Peak National Forest. I should have been looking at scenery. All I could think of was, Kim, can you drive a little faster to get me to the hospital? Okay, I just want something to stop the pain, right? When you and I are suffering, it doesn't matter whether it's 20 minutes or it doesn't matter whether it's 20 years. It seems like it's an eternity. And what you and I want to remember is this: when we can't find the why, and we may never know it, we can still cling to these truths. The just shall live by faith, the earth will be filled with God's glory, and God is still on his throne. You say, well, how did that help Habakkuk? Great question. Look at Habakkuk chapter 3. It's like one of the most beautiful passages when you understand the depth of discouragement that it's up against. God never gave him the answer to the why. God gave him some truths about himself that would change history. Here's one of my favorite passages in all of the Bible. Though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food, the flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, verse 18, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. God, the Lord, is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's. He makes me tread on high places. And then just like that, the book of Habakkuk is over. All of the, give me an answer. I didn't like that answer. Give me another answer. I'm listening. Oh, you gave me truths about yourself. Oh, those truths about myself bring me to this conclusion. Here's how I want to say that with you, just like this. Let me go back and give you this idea. For those of you who like to take notes, here it is. Make it your pattern to worship him by faith, not by sight. Right? Make it your pattern to worship him by faith, not by sight. Habakkuk chapter 3 ends with Habakkuk not seeing or getting the answer he wanted. Instead, he recognizes God for who he is, and he realizes he's got to worship by faith. Even though he may not have the answer to his why, he can still worship. So he worships by faith, knowing that the day will come when we'll worship God on the other side by sight. Here's a phrase I just want you to say with me, okay? Let's just do this together. Sometimes my circumstances, I'll read it first and then you can read it with me. Sometimes my circumstances go from bad to worse. Then I'm asked to worship by faith, not by feeling. And I remember God's strength is made perfect in my weakness, okay? This is the heart of Habakkuk 3, verse 17 through 19. Say it with me, okay? Here we go, 1, 2, 3. Sometimes my circumstances go from bad to worse. Then I'm asked to worship by faith, not by feeling. And I remember God's strength is made perfect in my weakness. Now look at the verse. I'll show it to you. Here it is. Sometimes my circumstances go from bad to worse. Look at chapter 3, verse 17. Notice there's 6 elements listed here. The fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines. The produce of the olive fail. The fields yield no food. The flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls. Let me explain to you what that means. The figs were a delicacy, okay? Step 1, no dessert. Some of you say, okay, that would be okay. I could go without dessert for a little while, right? No dessert. Step 2, no fruit on the vines. That's where the wine comes in, and that's where the drinks come in, and that's where there's sustenance there. Listen, even the vines fade. See how you just started with no dessert, now you're getting to what you drink? The produce of the olive fails. The olive oil was used not only for cooking, but it was also used for heating and light. Now you've lost your power back then, and you've also lost some of your ability to do some of your cooking. You don't have that oil anymore, so now you don't have that. And now the fields themselves yield no food. So now you're moving to starvation. Now the flocks will be cut off from the fold. Listen, your sheep wandered off. They didn't come back. And now your herd will not be in the stalls. Those are the cattle who help you with the plowing. Typically in Old Testament times, they weren't eating them as much as they were using them as workhorses. Here's the picture. It went from bad to worse. How many of you have said in your life at some stage, wow, this just went from bad to worse? Did you say that? Okay. Habakkuk says that. My life just went from bad to worse. We go from bad to worse, and we are drawn typically to let everybody know it just went from bad to worse. Okay. Do you notice what Habakkuk is drawn to? Look at the next phrase. Then I'm asked to worship by faith, not by feeling. I love this in Habakkuk 3:18. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. You say, well, how can you do that if it went from bad to worse? Because you don't have to feel like you need to worship the Lord to worship the Lord. Right? I tell our men this all the time in the men's group. Listen, most people tell me something like this, Phil, if I actually do something and I don't feel like doing it, that makes me a hypocrite. So I'll ask you a question. How many of you have ever gone to school or to work when you didn't feel like going? What a bunch of hypocrites. It doesn't make you a hypocrite to not do what you don't feel like doing. It makes you responsible to do what you don't feel like doing. God knows. God knows how hard it is for you to sing a song when you're hurting and suffering, and it's talking about his love and compassion for you. Make your lips say it. God knows how hard it is for you to affirm that. I sat with this man yesterday. He says to me, listen, here's what I've been trying to do. He pulls up his phone, and he says, I can't read it. I take the phone from his hand, and I begin to read things like, God sent his son to die on the cross for me. I've been given 4 wonderful kids. I was given great years with my wife. I begin to recount him recording God's goodness to him. I slid the phone back over and I said, man, you got to keep doing that. Right? You and I go from bad to worse, and we don't go back to remember what God has done. How do we expect to sustain and worship the Lord? We need to do what? Worship and rejoice in the Lord even when we do not feel like it. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. Here's the last one. And I remember God's strength is made perfect in my weakness. Wow, that's great. God the Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's. He makes me tread on high places. God the Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like deer's. He makes me tread on my high places. I love the personal pronoun there, my high places. When I was younger, I wasn't scared of high places. Okay? A few years ago, I was building a treehouse for my kids in the backyard, and I got high enough that I needed the ladder, and so I took the ladder back there. Everybody was away. I was the only one home. I'm back next to this tree. I set the step ladder up. I'm climbing up the step ladder, and I can't quite reach. I'm a little height challenge, so I can't quite reach where I need to drive the screwdriver in, and so I see that step that says, this is not a step. Do not step on this step. Okay? And I think, I'm pretty balanced. I can do this, right? I step on that step. I lean hard into the power screwdriver. I start to drill the screw, and I feel the ladder go, and I fall like about 8 or 9 feet flat to my back. And I lay there, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm not even going to move until I can think about a few things, like, am I still alive? Okay, I am. Can I move my fingers? Like, I was afraid that if I moved something, I'd really mess something up. And I remember thinking, the first thing I thought, before I thought of if I'm still alive, was I thought, that was really stupid. Okay, that was really stupid. But here I am, okay? And I'm feeling my fingers move, and I'm feeling okay, and I sit up, and everything feels okay, because I'm thinking, nobody's even home. They're not even going to find me back here at night. Like, I'm going to spend the whole night underneath the treehouse. Where did Dad go? Okay. And when I finally realize things are moving, okay, something happened to me. Right? I suddenly didn't like high places anymore. I'll be honest with you, I was a little afraid of them, right? I was glad I had an 18-year-old son to clean gutters. Hey, can you go clean the gutters? Okay. Why can't you get him? Just go do it, okay? It's great. I don't even like to get on ladders without something to hold on to. Did you notice this? God the Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's. He makes me tread on my high places. So what are you afraid of? What do you fear? What are your high places? Did you realize our God is with you in that? He's with you in that. Even though it's going from bad to worse, even though he's asking you to worship him, even when you don't feel like it, even though you're afraid of certain things, can I just tell you this? The God, the Lord, is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's. He makes me tread on my high places. Here's what you want to know. God's strength, as Paul said in 1 Corinthians, is made perfect in your weakness. The very things you're afraid of, that's where God will show himself strong. We're going to celebrate the Lord's table this morning. We're going to remember that we may not get all the answers we want to the questions we have, but this one thing we know, Christ came. Christ died in our place so that we might have the hope of eternal life. That is what Christ did. If you have everything else that's gone from bad to worse, you can come back to this truth. Christ alone is sufficient. He alone is sufficient. We'll sing songs. You'll hear songs about how we weren't clean, but God made us clean. We'll invite you to sing as the elements are distributed about the love of our Father that was so great. Right? I just want you to pause and remember that whatever your circumstances are, from bad to worse, God is saying, listen, worship me, remember me, because these truths stick. There comes a day where my glory will fill the earth. There comes a day where you will see that I was on my throne in my temple, and there comes a day, today, where by faith we can be made right. Take a moment and just dwell upon what Jesus has done.